Our next speaker is Ellie. I met Ellie, we were at a meeting, I think in Parliament, and we were both listening. I think actually, David, you were there too, and we were both nodding away at the same time. I think, she's a fellow traveller. Ellie, you've got a daughter and pregnant with your second, so very much in the realm of the early years. You're the research lead for the organisation The Other Half, and The Other Half is a centre for research looking at the practical, workable policies in the interest of women. And we've just published a recent report about what do mothers want in the early years. I think your focus is to try to look away from what GDP wants and what the economy wants and what mothers and children want and need.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you so much, Anna. Thank you. So, hello everyone. It's an honour to be with you here today. As Anne said, I'm here from The Other Half, and I'm here to share with you the findings of a recent project we've undertaken. An initiative rooted in understanding what mothers in our country genuinely need and want, as opposed to what policy often assumes. The inspiration from this project came from a number of questions myself and my manager had been reflecting on, both as researchers and as mums of young children ourselves. And I'm sure these questions will resonate with many of you here. Are our current policies for mothers... Are our current policies for mothers truly aligned with what they value most? And do they address the real challenges they face each day? Or are we missing the mark? At the heart of today's policy landscape, the big offering to mothers, as we've heard, and as I'm sure we're all aware, is low-cost childcare, provided, of course, to enable mothers to get back to work as quickly as possible after having children. But we had to ask, is this what mothers genuinely want? To answer this question, we went to the source and asked mothers directly. Through nearly 600 survey responses and 23 in-depth interviews, we gathered an incredibly rich array of experiences and perspectives, each painting a different part of a larger picture. These are stories that reveal what it's truly like to navigate motherhood today, from the constant stresses and strains of the cost of living crisis to a dearth of family and community support. And these insights illuminate a gap between the lives mothers want to lead and the policy support currently available to them. And what we found was both revealing and urgent. In place of a one-size-fits-all push to return to work, mothers are asking for something more comprehensive and more thoughtful. They want family-friendly work policies, more time to bond with and care for their young children, and a supportive economy and community that values the role of caregiving. So today I'll walk you through these findings, and together we'll explore what these mothers are really asking for. Their insights compel us to think beyond the existing framework and reimagine a policy landscape that truly supports mothers in the ways they need from both an economic and social perspective. So let's dive in and take a closer look at what mothers are telling us and what a better path forward might look like for supporting families. The policy landscape for mothers has changed drastically in the last few years, or few decades, and not for the better. The UK once had ambitions to provide strong family support, think Sure Start, but over time this promise has faded. Despite evolving needs, the government's response hasn't kept up, leaving mothers to fend for themselves in a world that often doesn't accommodate for their needs or their aspirations. Mothers today are asking for more time with their children, not less. They're seeking family-friendly work options that allow them to balance professional ambitions with the time they want to spend with their children. Importantly, and aligning with the theme of this conference, they're calling for a shift in policy that enables families to spend more time with their children, especially in the crucial early years. They also want a renewed sense of community support, a village that can help share the responsibilities of caregiving, alleviate isolation, and strengthen family life. At the core, mothers are simply asking policymakers to listen to their needs and design a system that actually reflects the needs of family life. And these aren't radical requests, they're fundamental desires for connection, flexibility, and support. Yet addressing them does call for meaningful change. A willingness to move beyond the short-term fixes that focus more on GDP than well-being, as we've heard, and instead to invest in long-term solutions that allow families to thrive. What mothers are asking for is a commitment to reimagining family policy as something that respects caregiving, fosters connection, and supports them in raising the next generation. So, let's look at the 5 priorities that we found in our report. And the first one is on the screen here. Mothers told us time and time again that the current focus on getting back to work quickly leaves them with very little time with their young children. And as we're aware, the first 3 years of a child's life are crucial for their development. But UK maternity pay and leave policies are severely limited. We would like to see a parental leave system similar to that in Germany, where parents can take up to 3 years out of the workforce over the first 8 years of a child's life. And most of this is paid. The employer is not required to give you the same job when you return, but it has to be at the same level of pay. So if you took all of that, you could have the first 3 years at home with your child in one go. And this would better accommodate for what mums want. Could we have the next slide, please? As one mum here says at the bottom, I don't want maternity leave to end. I really feel my daughter needs me full-time for another year. I don't feel ready to leave her, but society expects it, and the mortgage needs paying. We found in our survey data that mothers who were taking time out of the workforce in the early years actually reported greater satisfaction with their time out of all the women who responded to our survey. Mothers want more time with their children, not less. But for many mums, this isn't possible because their jobs don't permit the flexibility to do so. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. Despite decades of talk about flexibility and work-life balance, work still doesn't allow for parenting, and all parents are now expected to work pretty much. Standard full-time work means that full-time childcare of up to 10 hours a day, and that means mums get a maximum of 2 hours a day with their infants, a concern they raise with us again and again. Oh, sorry, could we go back the slide, please? So I want to quote another mum here. This one here, the bottom right. Work takes up too much time. I feel sad that I only see my daughter for a couple of hours on weekdays. And we could go back to the next slide, please. Thank you. Almost all, 94% of the full-time working mothers that we surveyed wanted to reduce their hours or leave the workforce for a time, with only 5% of those mums saying that they'd maintain their current full-time working pattern. Mums value flexibility and the ability to work around their children. They want a jobs market with parent-friendly part-time roles and flexibility, so mums who choose to can continue in their career without needing to sacrifice time with their children or drop out of the workforce altogether. Mums told us that they want to take career pauses and be able to return to roles that use their talents and not be penalised for taking time out of the workforce for parenting. As one mum told us, can we move slides, please? Thank you. This bottom quote here. My little boy is my whole world. We struggled to conceive, and now I'm facing going back to work or struggling financially. I don't want to have it all, and I often feel if I don't go back, I will be judged and then struggle to re-enter the workforce when I'm ready. Availability of roles with greater flexibility, like core or compressed hours, was the key workplace ask from our mothers, along with part-time working. But for many, this is a pipe dream. Part-time or flexible roles aren't available in their lines of work. As this mum told us on the right here, it's so disheartening because in my line of work, law, anything flexible is looked upon as if you aren't dedicated to your job. And this means that mums who do find part-time work end up taking positions that underutilise their skills. Some progress has been made by our current government, who have introduced day one rights to request flexible working. But the right to request flexible working doesn't mean the right to flexible working. And a right from day one doesn't help those mums who require certainty of flexibility from the offset. For example, we interviewed Rebecca, who's one of our case studies in our report. She is a 1-year-old and is currently on sick leave from her job and knows she needs to look for another one soon. And she's really worried about this. For her, the new flexible working legislation doesn't help. And she told us, and I'll quote, I could get accepted for a job and then immediately put my flexible working request in. But what would I do in the meantime? And what if they rejected it? I know it would be good practice to have that conversation during the recruitment process, but then the employer could so easily then not shortlist me or offer me the job or not offer me the job because another candidate would work full time. I don't know what I'm going to do. The part-time jobs just aren't there. We want to see a jobs market that truly accommodates for the needs of mothers, that enables flexible working and career pauses for mums to take time out to care. And that leads us on to priority 3, which is the next slide, please. I'll start. The high cost of living in the UK, including skyrocketing housing and childcare costs, make it nearly impossible for many families to get by on a single income. Even families with a good combined income find themselves stretched too thin financially. The high income child benefit charge penalises high earners and particularly affects families on disparate or single incomes. We need a national conversation on family affordability. This should include better parental leave pay, tax reform for families, as we've heard, and a pension system that doesn't penalise those who take time out of the workforce to care for young children. And what we heard repeatedly from mums was that they love to be able to live on one income, at least for the period while their children are young. Right now, many need 2 incomes just to survive, as Anne said at the start. As one mum told us, can we have the next slide, please? The one in the middle there. I think it's sad we're at a place where both parents need to work to support a family. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you all here that the mums we surveyed categorically informed us that more funded childcare was not the solution to this problem. The childcare expansions don't actually accommodate for the needs of the majority of mothers we surveyed. In fact, 69% of the mums viewed the proposed childcare expansion negatively. 40% of the respondents gave it 0 out of 10 when asked whether it makes them feel listened to or valued as a mother. This corresponds with Department for Education research on parents' use of formal childcare, which revealed that of those who don't use paid childcare or external family support, 67% of those parents said it was because they wanted to look after the children themselves. And as this mum told us, this one at the bottom, I feel that government/society place more value on a mother's contribution to the economy by working, rather than contribution to society in raising their own children. We want to see an economy that values this care. The next slide, please. Thank you. But we know that the support mums need isn't just financial. As we all know, it takes a village to raise a child. And today, for many, that village has all but disappeared. Many mums told us that they feel isolated, with fewer local playgroups and support groups available to them. And they describe being left to manage alone, particularly as families live further apart and community support has dwindled. Modern life encourages young people to move for university and for work, leaving them without family nearby when they have children. And with grandparents often still in the workforce, families are left often with little outside help. Playgroups and community resources, which once offered support and social connection, are scarce, as the working all the time model leaves fewer volunteers available to run them and fewer families available to attend. For example, we heard from Elizabeth, who's another case study in our report, who was a stay-at-home mum and who told us, and I'll quote, in her area, none of the children's centres reopened after COVID. One has since been repurposed as a state nursery. She told us, there are no stay and play groups now because most mums go back to work after maternity leave, so there's not as much demand for them. But where do we go then? For many, childcare centres have replaced community-led playgroups, and some mothers even feel judged for choosing to stay home with their children, a choice that has become increasingly rare because of financial pressures. Can we have, that slide, please. So the top left quote there's absolutely no play school type provision that my own mother benefited from in the 80s. And I feel most of my peers truly believe that not sending a child to nursery at 12 months is the wrong way to parent. And I should have included the rest of this quote that this mother gave us because it was really poignant. And I'll quote it here. She says, I live in a rural area and worried before my child was born that I might be judged for being a lesbian mother. I was completely wrong. I'm judged endlessly for being a stay-at-home mum. Mothers are calling for a return of this village, a network of family, friends and community groups and targeted services who can provide support during the joyful but stressful journey of early parenthood. And I know this bottom speech bubble is a really long one, but I'd love to read it out in full if that's okay, because I think it really gets to the heart of what a lot of mums told us. There seems to be a conflict in our modern society. Employers want a full-time workforce. The government wants all parents to be in the workforce. Yet mothers don't want full-time working. Town centres, local playgroups and children's centres are absent Monday to Friday of children. You'll see mothers on maternity leave with their babies, but anyone older than 12 months is at nursery or at work. Then come the weekend, local services are overwhelmed. Parks, museums, family attractions are cramming us all in like sardines, while we try to make the most of the short time we have with our family on Saturdays and Sundays, because our society doesn't make it possible on the other days. Is this the quality of life we're supposed to be striving for? We hope not. So, the next slide, please. Thank you. Priority 5, which is our final point. Finally, what I believe to be one of the most important findings from our survey aligns very strongly with sentiments from David's book, which is that many mums feel profoundly ignored by Westminster. As we've heard, terms like economic inactivity, motherhood penalty, childcare burden, these all reinforce the idea that a mother's time spent caring for her child is somehow wasted. And we heard this from our survey responses again and again. Mothers recognise that GDP is being prioritised over their needs and their children's needs. And can I have the quote slide, please? I'd just like to read each of these out for you, if that's okay. I believe that these government reforms to childcare provision have been made solely in the interest of increasing GDP and getting more mothers back into the workforce as soon as possible after having a baby. This approach doesn't consider whether this is the best thing for those mothers or their children. And the second one. The current reform feels like it's just to benefit the economy and has not been designed with families in mind. I want more options to participate in the workforce and be with my child. And finally, caring for children during the early years isn't valued by our society. Educators are badly paid and considered to be glorified babysitters, doing a job that anyone could do. Equally, stay-at-home parents are seen as lazy and overprivileged. Neither role is respected or valued, financially or otherwise. We need a new policy approach, one that respects mothers' choices. The mums we spoke to didn't see motherhood as a pay penalty or a burden, which is a sort of language you'll typically hear used by journalists, politicians, and campaign groups who campaign for more childcare. Instead, being a mum was one of, if not the, most important aspect of their lives. They want to feel appreciated for this vital work that they're doing in raising the next generation. And final slide, please. As this mum told us, consistent attachment relationships set a child up for life. This time is critical for the future of mental health and well-being of people as they grow. GDP matters, but children matter more. We couldn't agree more. So, to conclude, this report, of course, isn't the last word on this topic. It's just a starting point. Mothers are telling us that they need a better offer, policy that makes family life possible, balanced and fulfilling. Our society should enable mothers to make choices that fit their lives, not force them into an endless cycle of work with minimal support. If we want the UK to be a place where young women feel confident about starting a family, we need to listen to what mothers are asking for. And as they've told us, modern life gives them no choice, no balance, and no village, just work. It's time to design policy that works for mums. So, thank you for listening. I'm sure much of what I've said here isn't news to you. And if any of you here did fill out our survey, because Mothers Home Matter were very kind to share it on their social media, then thank you very much. And I hope this report has done you justice. And I hope that it leads to a positive change in policy making with your needs in mind. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie. that was really comprehensive, and I think, yeah, it sums up, I think, what many of us feel. Again, we have a couple of questions, one online and from the room.
Thank you so much for the report. I was wondering, did you also look at, was it mostly to do questions about mothers staying with their children in the early years? Because you mentioned Germany, and it's interesting that they have this policy of like first 3 years you can get out of work, but at the same time they almost banned homeschooling. So that's a bit, I think it's a bit of paradoxical in that sense, because basically, how I see it, it's just kind of seems like parental authority is less and less valued later, because we want to get children in school and teach them all the same, but then they can't homeschool.
Yeah, that's a great question, thank you. We did actually only ask mums about the early years specifically in this report. That's not because we think that's the only part that matters, but that's what we wanted to focus on in this report, especially because we wrote it at a time when this childcare expansion had just happened in the UK, and we wanted to ask whether this aligns with what mums actually want. But you've raised a really valid point there. We did find, looking at Germany's policy, that the 3 years you can take, at least you can take in 3 slots over up to the age of 8, I believe. But it does allow you to take it all in one go, so you can have those first full 3 years with your child. But yeah, we didn't look at homeschooling, but it's a really great point. Thank you for raising it.
I think it's something we might touch on in the afternoon with Madeline, because she's looking at me going, what? But I know that the same in like Sweden, you have this excellent first year where you're allowed to be at home, but then it's very much you must be going into school or childcare, and actually homeschooling is banned, and you have to leave the country in order to do it. So it is an issue if you want to be there, yeah.
I do actually know a mum from Germany who has left the country so she can homeschool her child. She's moved here. But yeah, thank you.
So very sad to read the testimony of the mothers who in your survey. Unfortunately, I'm forced to say that I don't find it particularly surprising that for all of us, male and female, when we expose ourselves to the money-making machine that is the free market economy, then it's the money-making machine that determines the pace, that sets the pace, and we all suffer as a result of that, men and women alike. So I don't particularly see it as a male-female issue. What I think we are, all of us, ultimately asking for is something much greater, which is the freedom not to behave economically, not to be forced to behave economically at all. I've been reading E.B. Schumacher's book, whatever it's called, Small is Beautiful, quite recently. And he points out that in this economic context, everything just keeps on getting worse for most people all of the time, except the very rich. And that is the nature of our free market capitalism. That's how it is. So what we are asking for, as Mothers at Home Matter and the other groups associated, is surely the freedom not to have to behave economically for mothers. And that's a vanishingly rare, a possibility for most. Even the home care allowance that David Goodhart recommends could only at the very most bring in about £10,000 a year, I think was the figure David quoted. Well, that's less than half the average net salary for a full-time worker. So generous though it sounds, it's nowhere near going to make the difference. If my daughter, who's renting at a 3-bedroomed house at £1,600 a month, if she gave up work to have a baby, her and her partner's net income would be £400 a month. And their housing costs 80%. In that scenario, their housing cost would be 80% of their income, which would be one income if she gave up work. Now, against that, in that context, anyway, it's an observation, it's a challenge, I don't know, it's not a question, but it's, there we are. Thank you.
Just a quick thing. The last quote you put on there was absolutely nailed it, and I'd like you to put it back up so I can take a picture of it, and we all can. And the point about it is, you've talked all about what mothers want, which is very good, but mothers want. But the developmental needs of children are incontrovertible, and if you put those in front of the politicians and all the decision makers and said, how are you going to make sure this is fulfilled, these needs, then what will they say? It's, a mother's wants is easier to dismiss than children's needs. And the whole future of our nation, not only the individuals, depends on getting that right.
No, thank you for both of those comments. Just to respond to the last one, you're so right. And we do have a section in our report on, I think the title is Are Mums Right to Value Time with Their Children, where we go through the research of how vitally important it is for mums to spend that time with their children, especially the first 3 years. There's amazing campaign groups out there at the moment. Some of them were at this Parliament event. The first 1001 Days movement, I'm sure many of you have heard of those, and a few others whose names escape me right now, that are really pushing this at the moment and showing how vital it is for not just early development, but how much that impacts later life. So you're very right. I don't see it making much of a difference at the moment, sadly, but hopefully it will. I feel like, and as a lot of the mums articulated, they recognise that this focus is on getting them back into work as soon as possible. It isn't on what's best for the children, and they recognise that. Yeah. 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 No, and I do think that there's a slight acknowledgement of that. I've heard Bridget Phillipson actually talk about how she recognises that the early stage of Sure Start, so Sure Start came in 2 stages. The first stage was focused on this family support, helping parents to stay together, giving parenting classes, things like that. They were really valuable. And then the second stage was focused on childcare, which was just getting those mums back into work. And not on those other priorities, which are what's best for children. And she recognises, which is what this data from the Institute of Fiscal Studies has just this year highlighted, that the first stage has had a massive impact on those children, and even the children who grew up alongside the children who use those Sure Start centres. We know that that's been massively beneficial to those children. And the second stage, I can't remember whether it had a negative impact or whether it had no impact at all, but it wasn't positive, at least. The first stage was. And so Bridget Phillipson has acknowledged that. I think she is aware of that, and I think that's a positive step. But she has also obviously still made the decision to carry on with the expansions to childcare, because the focus instead isn't on the children, it's on getting mums back into work as soon as possible, which is a shame, of course.
Ellie, I've got one more online, if that's all right. Zoe asks, how are participants recruited? Which socioeconomic groups will affect? Which socioeconomic groups were they, as this will affect the outcomes of the study?
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a great question, and I have some stats here. At the end of our report, which you can find online, and if you do want to find me later, I can give you the details, but you can also find it on the other half's website. We have the final pages on the methodology, where we outline how they were recruited, and some of the data on demographics. So we use social media a lot. So we had Instagram advertisements, Facebook advertisements, and we plugged it with as many groups we could, WhatsApp groups, play groups that we're part of, things like that. But I can give a few stats on the demographics. So the survey respondents, this is all on the survey respondents, by the way, not necessarily the interviewees that we had. So the survey respondents were slightly more likely to be in work than not in work as mums of children in the early years. So 78% of these mums were in work, including those on maternity leave, which is slightly above the national average. 21% of the mums were not in employment or training, and that's consistent with ONS data on mums at this point in their lives. 15% of the working mothers were in high-income households, which is also slightly more than the national average. And a big one was 93% of our mothers were in 2-parent households, which is also slightly above the national average, which is the national average in early years is 15% are 15% are single parents. So our 93% of two-parent households is slightly above that. But we did have some publicity from a single-parent advocacy group, so we did get more participants through talking to them, which was great. But yeah, it's not entirely representative of that group. We didn't ask any participant data on ethnicity or sexuality, so we don't have that data available. And we didn't include data from women who didn't have children. So we don't have data available on why women aren't necessarily having children if they want to, because we didn't ask those mums. So I hope that gives a few of the stats, and there is more available on the report itself.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you. That's really great. Thank you, and look forward to more questions later. Thank you.